with Utah Attorney General Sean Reyes. He's one of two candidates hoping to get the party nomination on the Republican side and move on to the general election in November. Sean, welcome back to the show. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, Glenn. Great to be with you.
Let's get right into it. You're seeking another term. Why do you want another term in the office of Attorney General?
Glenn, I love the state of Utah. I love the people of Utah. And for the last 6.5 years, I've stood watch over the state to protect our children from child sex predators and traffickers and abusers, to protect our teens from threats like drug dealers and vaping and suicide. I've protected our families from their finances from white-collar fraudsters, scammers, and schemers, and their important data and private information from hackers. And I want to continue to do that because I'm not done yet. I want to continue to build on the momentum that we've created. My team and I in the AG's office, we've worked with so many Utahns out there to make Utah stronger, to make Utah safer, and we still have work to do. Now, I work my tail off, Glenn. You know that. You see me up and down the state, a lot of 70, 80-hour weeks traveling up and down Utah. Sometimes I have to fly out to D.C., to the Supreme Court, to the White House, to Congress to bring back wins or resources for the state of Utah, but I'm always dedicated to fighting to protect the people of Utah. And not just from these physical threats, the ones that I mentioned, and not just white-collar frauds and crimes, but other threats like the opioid epidemic that's taking so many Utah lives, mental behavioral health threats like suicide, which is the #1 cause of death for our teens. And I've helped lead out, not just here in Utah, but around the nation, to be able to bring resources back, protect more Utahns. Our office does so many things, Glenn. It's hard to encapsulate it in just a couple of minutes. The lawyers that I have that we worked with are dedicated, but I brought back integrity, trust to the highest levels of the office, a winning attitude, and we are winning on behalf of the state of Utah. Want to continue that momentum, whether it's protecting seniors from elder abuse or veterans, helping them make sure that they have proper legal representation, standing up for law enforcement when they deserve it, which is most of the time, and calling them on that.
Yeah, let's get into that a little more. That's a huge topic right now,
Sure.
not only here in the state of Utah, but across the country. We all watched the video, the death of George Floyd, and it has brought outrage all across the country. I want to ask you, do you believe there is a systemic racism problem within our policing forces throughout the country? And if so, what are solutions?
Well, let me say this, because I want to finish that thought. I say I stand up for law enforcement, Glenn, when they deserve it. And I call them on it and hold them accountable when they deserve it also. And in this case, this George Floyd case, roundly, all of the law enforcement leaders that I know in Utah, including myself, denounced, decry that inhumane treatment of Mr. Floyd. It was an embarrassment, a stain on the badge in law enforcement. Those officers should never have worn the badge. My office has even prosecuted those and held accountable law enforcement when they've stepped way out of line. Now,
do you
to
see
your
that
question,
as a systemic problem, though?
I think it's a problem we have to address, Glenn. I think it's a problem that is one, while there are cases like George Floyd out there, we haven't done enough, and Utah needs to do more. But I will quickly point out that Utah has been working on this issue since 2014, at least. How do I know? Because I sat down after Ferguson and after the Garner case with the National Urban League and with the NAACP, and we created here in Utah, in the AG's office, a de-escalation training system based on a virtual reality program where we've trained over 3,500 officers at all levels, federal, state, county, city, tribal, to reduce violence, to make sure that there's proper use of force, to understand cultural nuances better. And I think Utah is helping to lead out. Those are the types of reforms, those are the types of training that I do believe law officers need throughout the country. Now, I can speak to Utah. I have not seen systemic racism throughout the law enforcement community of Utah. I have seen bad actors from time to time that don't represent the 99% of honorable law enforcement, Glenn.
Have you seen the most recent video of a shooting, a police officer-involved shooting death in Salt Lake City with Bernardo Palacios Carvajal?
Have not seen the video. I've heard about the case.
Okay, we will wait and get your opinion on that another time. Then let's move on to criminal justice reform.
Yes.
Your opponent, this is a big talking point of his, that he wants to be smarter on crime. he says you're not doing that. Your response to that?
Yeah, the irony is this is my opponent's one issue that he talks about, and I've done far more in the last 6.5 years than he's done throughout his entire career on this issue. I'll give you just one example, but I can give you 20, and I'd ask the listeners to come to my website if they're interested in criminal justice reform. The First Step Act was monumental, historic, and the Republican Party was a little bit late to that game, but starting a decade or more ago in Texas, you had Governor Perry and others helping to bring Republicans around. And this presidency under President Trump and this Congress passed reform that was critically needed. And it touched on a whole host of things, including sentencing, including incarceration, recidivism. And it was me that Senator Lee called on. It was me that the White House called on to help get this passed. I worked on the Justice Reinvestment Initiative in Utah. I've helped bring amazing organizations like the Other Side Academy and One Heart that take those who are accountable and who are willing to stand up, train them in job skills, education, and make them productive members of society. Those are critical things. But I want to be clear, I go after aggressively the violent criminals, those bad actors that need to be incarcerated, and we send others. And I've supported these programs like low-level offenders who are addicts. They need treatment, they need rehabilitation, they need help. They don't need to be incarcerated.
Okay.
I've been working on these issues.
We're quickly running out of time, and I want to hit on a couple other points here. The
Sure.
Affordable Care Act. You joined a group of other attorneys general across the country trying to have the courts overturn that. Why do that, given there's no alternative in place to replace it at this point?
Well, Glenn, it's unconstitutional to begin with. So as a baseline, no matter how much you may like a policy, if it's unconstitutional, it needs to be struck down. But if you look at the policy, Glenn, it's not done what it's intended to do. More people are covered, but far more people are underinsured, meaning they can't even access physicians and medical care even when they have coverage because premiums are astronomical. And those who are covered...
There are things that both sides of the aisle like, though. For instance, no more pre-existing conditions. Kids can stay on a plan through 26.
Adult kids?
Yeah,
let's talk about that,
should there not be
Glenn?
some things in place before we look at dismantling it?
Yeah, absolutely. And our state, just like Louisiana and other states, can pass those types of benefits as part of state health care. And the federal government can pass a new law in place. This is not going to be struck down. It's not even going to be heard by the Supreme Court, likely until 2021, Glenn. So there's no fear immediately that this law is going away. There's right now nothing, but I would encourage our legislature to look very heavily. I support pre-existing condition coverage and adult children coverage. I think those things are positive.
Sean, let's move on to banjo. Even before the latest news with the CEO, it was a pretty controversial issue. Do you stand by using that type of software and technology in law enforcement?
When you say that type, I want to be clear. Banjo took in no personal private information. People like Senator Mike Lee and his team looked it over up and down and gave it their blessing because it did protect the public and it did protect and provide safety without violating any privacy. Even with all that, Glenn, I was the one who said we should have a commission or committee look at issues. Whenever you're dealing with monitoring people's information, we should have oversight. And now the auditor has taken that up, created a commission, which I fully support. So yes, I believe that banjo is the type of technology. Not all technologies. Banjo does no facial recognition. Banjo takes in no personal private information. It doesn't exist in their ecosystem. So on that particular technology, I'm comfortable with, but not all. And that's why we need commission and oversight to make sure that people's liberties and privacy are protected while we're trying to protect the public like I have for the last 6.5 years.
Okay, you mentioned you encourage people to get to know you better. What is a website where our viewers can go to learn more about your policies?
It's easy. It's SeanReyes.com. Come check out the issues. Come check out more about me at SeanReyes.com. I ask your listeners for their vote. I'd like 4 more years to finish what we started. I work my heart out for Utah, and I'm going to continue to do that, Glenn. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, we have run out of time. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.